Well, it is a beautiful morning, and I looked it up on Google, and Google doesn't lie, that we've had 54 days that have gone below zero this winter. I think it might be a record, and it still has a chance to do that this morning. You know, when dawn starts, it usually goes down. I just want to start this morning, though, by saying we really need to be praying for the whole Ukraine situation. It has ramifications literally around the world, certainly for Europe and NATO and our own country. It has economic implications. And you may not know this, but Converge Worldwide, which is the group of churches that we're a part of, used to be known as the Baptist General Conference, has had a very vigorous mission in Ukraine for the last 25 years or so. We've sent hundreds of teams over there over the summers to do sports camps. Daryl Sanborn, whom some of you know, has been over there a dozen times, and other people have been with him. So we have some knowledge of the Christian community there, and it's a nation that's suffered probably more than any other nation in terms of warfare going through them, their enslavement, their subjugation to other powers. Stalin starved 13 million Ukrainians, 13 million, when he nationalized all the farms and put quotas on them, and the quota would be so heavy that by the time they paid their quota, they didn't have enough to eat. And that's how he cleared the land. So can you imagine, that in your parents' memory in the 1930s, that they lost 13 million people by the ruthless hand of Stalin. So you can imagine, I know it's a complicated situation, but be in prayer about that and be as knowledgeable as you can. I mean, I don't know what we can trust, really, when we hear these things, but we do know that it's devastating and people are at risk. Well, have you heard any lies lately? Well, yeah, actually, Putin said he was going to be the liberator. I don't think that's true. All kinds of lies can take place. And commandment number 9 is, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And if you're new with us this morning at Ironworks, we're walking through the 10 Commandments as a scaffolding to build a worldview. And we're drilling down on each one of them for 2 or 3 weeks to show how it really walks in the street, how it really makes a difference. And Commandments 8 and 9 are really kind of connected in our minds, and at least in my mind, because commandment number 8 is, you shall not steal, but there are many things that you can steal with words. You can steal a lot of things with words. What would some of those be? Well, you could lose your reputation with a rumor. You could lose your job with an accusation. You could lose your family or your marriage by someone planting a suspicious rumor about you or lying about you. You could be maligned and demeaned in your business. You could be canceled, like Mike Lindell, who said some things that people didn't like, and so they not only canceled him, they continue to vilify him. Medical doctors have been canceled who had alternative opinions about COVID and other things. The Canadian truckers are defamed every day by certain aspects of the media. The 9th commandment really pierces because as all the elements, all the commandments do, this one really pierces to the heart of what we intend, to our motives, to our moral fiber. Because when I determine to bear false witness, I'm determining to hurt someone else. I'm determined to twist the truth so that I'm not in the spotlight. I turn that on someone else to do them harm. And that's why the term my neighbor is in the command. It's to do not bear false witness against your neighbor. So at the point of stress, at the point where I may be looked upon as devious or something, or I've done something wrong, at that point I divert that, I invent something else, I point it in another direction, and it hurts someone else. That's what a lie does. That's what falsehood does. I go back to the Me Too movement. There are legitimate issues where women have been abused by men. I acknowledge that. But remember how rampant that was? How many people were accused? And once you're accused, the headline goes out, but the retraction never seems to appear anywhere. Or it's on page 7, column 3, in tiny print. And so we want to talk about this. We could even lose our country because of false witness. And I think we've seen that in some of the things that have happened in Congress and hopefully have been interdicted and intercepted. But because of lies, because of falsehood, so many things have happened. So I want to give you 3 reasons this morning why this commandment is so important. And the first one is this: God's people are to reflect God's character. So let's start at the highest plane. Let's start at the motivation of the heart, that as one of God's people, one whom Christ has called to himself, one who wants to follow him and represent him, my character should in some approximate way reflect who he is. And God does not lie. The Lord is truthful. And we're called by his name. He wants us to reflect who he is. Listen to this passage in Numbers chapter 23. I think you might have it on the screen, but just listen to the way this drills down into the 9th commandment, all the ways that it applies, and the way that keeping this commandment builds a benevolent community. You shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. My dad always said to me, do not ever join a mob. They always turn bad. You shall not fall in with the many who do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit, siding with the many, so as to pervert justice. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. So there can be no preceding bias in a courtroom. I'm always going to judge for the victim or who appears to be the victim. No, this has to be equal scales of justice. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him. It's not the donkey who hates you, it's the man who hates you, right? And you're to help your neighbor even though he hates you. You shall not pervert the justice due to your poor in his lawsuit. Keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent and the righteous. For I will not acquit the wicked, and you shall take no bribe. For a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of those who are in the right. You shall not oppress a sojourner. You know the heart of a sojourner, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You can see that Commandments 8 and 9 are sort of intertwined in that one section in Exodus chapter 23. It's a beautiful passage to help us realize this is not about just me keeping some kind of rigid prohibition in my life. It's about how I can live and have a benevolent society, at least within the network that I control, if I speak the truth at all times. Dennis Prager is a radio host, and many of you know him, and he's writing commentaries on the entire Torah. He has spent his life teaching the Torah. He's not a believer. My wife prays for him all the time, thinking this guy is like the Apostle Paul before he converted to Christ. He knows the law. He's a wise man. I appreciate his tone most of the time because he's after clarity, and he wants clarity first, not agreement. But he says this, and I thought this was insightful. In the societal realm, truth is even more important than compassion or kindness. Virtually all the great societal evils, whether African slavery, communism, Nazism, or anti-Semitism, have been based on lies. The lie that the African is not really human. The lie that the Jews are subhuman. The lie that Karl Marx propounded in his horribly flagrant use of statistics
that were inaccurate, that spawned communism that killed 65 million people in the 20th century. So I think he's really onto something here. So the Westminster Catechism, which we're not very familiar with, that's for Presbyterians, but catechisms are good to gather some of the implications of Scripture, and I'm going to give you 9 of them, just 4 of them right now. They're on the prohibition side. So the thing we need to guard against is that in court I should never lie or deceive. I mean, part of the reason for the 9th commandment is for the courtroom, but it's not there alone. Secondly, God's will is that I never give false testimony against anyone. No false testimony. Thirdly, twist no one's words. Oh, man, do we see that? It's selective reporting so that I or my tribe or my ideology always looks good and the other guy always looks bad. Number 4, do not gossip or slander. And that is those are tremendous things to know. And as we think about these implications of not bearing false witness, but actually speaking the truth and living the truth, it really makes a society worth living in. That's where we want to be. So it says here, do not bear false witness against your neighbor. Why does it say against your neighbor? Well, let me take a little bit of a bunny trail here and get you to think about the real world in which we live, because it doesn't just say, do not bear false witness ever. Because if it said that, then it would command that at all times to all people under any kind of threat, you're to tell the absolute truth. But we know in the Scripture that there are exceptions to that. Remember Rahab? Rahab was a harlot in Jericho, and Joshua and other spies came into Jericho, and they were being hunted, and Rahab lied to save their lives. Now, we need to be very careful about this, but let me give you some other examples. Pharaoh's daughters and the midwives concealed Moses, saved his life, and Moses became the greatest leader next to Jesus probably the world has ever seen. The wise men diverted Herod from finding Jesus. What's that? Jacob, yep.
He lied to his father to get the blessing.
That's right. Yeah. I'm not sure that was justified, but anyway.
How about Corrie ten Boom?
Well, Corrie ten Boom, I was just going to say that. To lie to the SS trooper at your door and tell him where the Jews are hiding, under the guise that, well, I have to tell the absolute truth to everyone. Well, I think there are exceptions, and there are things that we lie about or we conceal the truth all the time. A spy, obviously, is deceiving just by his or her appearance and the language that they use. A silent burglar alarm is not telling the truth to the thief. Right? I think we all recognize that one. That would be stupid, right? We are hiding our nuclear silos. Now, I'm just opening up something here that I trust you with. We need to be very, very careful about this because we're talking about an ethical borderline that is very, very rare. But in this world, sometimes there are absolutes that clash, that contradict each other. So when it says, don't bear false witness against your neighbor, I think what it really is intending to say is, obviously, truth should be 99.9999% of our speech and our actions, but it's also so that we do it to our neighbor, so we're not harming someone else. It has a direction, and the direction is to bless, to keep, to guard the neighbor and not harm your neighbor. But it's not saying the absolute truth needs to be told to someone seeking to do us evil. Now that doesn't apply to just because you don't like someone. Don't label your business competitor evil so you don't have to tell them the truth. I'm not going there. But someone seeking to do us evil, something that's against God's law, something that disobeys the law, or someone who is wanting to use the truth to pillage, rape, and murder, We don't tell the absolute truth today. We say, "Well, he went that way." We point them in the wrong direction. No enemy has the right to knowledge that is used to do evil. And we have built into even our law some hints at this. For example, we have the attorney-client privilege, where something you can say to your attorney doesn't have to be exposed in court. We have the pastor-parishioner privilege, so you can tell me anything. I'll just write about it in my memoirs, but I won't tell anybody right now. There are things about confidentiality, and I know some of this is gray. There's a difference between keeping a confidence and hoarding a secret. So all I want to say is that there are some borderline issues here where I think the Scripture is very careful to say, do not bear false witness against your neighbor, because it's saying, do not plan to do harm to people who would be victims of your untruth. But it's not making this absolute that you would be righteous in speaking the truth to the Nazi trooper and so that he can go and murder people. So again, that's a borderline issue, but occasionally it happens in our world, and maybe you've experienced something like that. Secondly, the reason that God has put this in his law is bearing false witness against another is destructive to the individual. I mean, the victim of untruth suffers a loss. There's so many ways that you can steal from him. His business, his reputation, his restaurant or her restaurant, their credibility, their reputation can be so easily besmirched. And even back in Leviticus it says, you shall love your neighbor. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And in Romans chapter 13, verses 9 and 10, it says, it basically repeats this, but here's what it says. It says, owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. So bearing false witness is harming your neighbor. So how can I steal from you with words? Well, I'm seeking therapy for this. I told you last week I paid $42 for this hunk of junk. It's probably worth 25 cents, if that. And, I'm not bitter, but I will get even somehow. So how can I steal from you? Dishonest advertising. We can change language and perpetuate a lie, a falsehood with language. Let's think of some language that I think is deceptive. Insurrection. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, I think that word has been misused and disproportionate to what happened on January 6th. We can talk about that at breakfast, not here. Marriage has been evacuated of its meaning and really neutered. The word hate has been redefined. If you disagree with someone now, you're a hater. Love has been redefined. Because, how can you stop love? Well, love means a license to live any kind of lifestyle you want to live. Family has been redefined in our generation. Gender. There are how many? 108 genders or something? It means nothing. The word has lost its meaning and it's deceptive. Even male and female has been redefined. So we can perpetuate something that is destructive. And when we think about neighbor, think about children. Think about young people. The way we use language is raising generations of people who will not know what the truth is about their gender. And that's deceptive. It's redefinition. Another way we can lie or steal with words is partial truth. Shading it. Shading things in my favor. In fact, it even happened at Jesus' trial. They finally found some false witnesses, and what did they do? They used a soundbite against Jesus. They said, this man said he's going to tear down this temple and then rebuild it in 3 days. Well, yeah, he said that, but there was no context in which he said it. And we see that all the time. You can deceive by your silence when correction or helpful information is desperately needed. And we kind of get at that in the Exodus 23 passage where it says, if you see your neighbor's possession, don't just walk by. Don't be a passive observer when your help or your information could be of value. When we deliberately ignore the context, and I know everybody who's in the news claims that they've been misquoted and it's out of context, but it really is true. When we soundbite people, it's usually untrue on both sides of the aisle. And then spin. To spin is basically knowing what I want this story to say before I ever do the investigation of the information. And that's what we see all the time. So think about some people who have been subject to this, where false witness was done with them. How about Clarence Thomas? Or Judge Kavanaugh? Or the Soviet kangaroo courts that sent hundreds of thousands of people to Siberia and to the gallows, and there was no fairness in the trial. Or in our own history, how about the Salem witch trials? And we could list some other. Remember the Central Park Five? Remember that story? Central Park Five, there was a woman who was jogging in Central Park in New York, and she was beaten and raped. And they caught these 5 young African-American men, and they accused them of this crime. They coerced them, basically tortured them, threatened them, and got confessions from all 5 of them, and it hit the news. And all of these young men spent many years in prison. And then the perp was found. And it was all because of a media-generated hunger that someone must be punished. And these guys seem to fit the profile that the culture wanted to blame. We could talk of many, many others. There are initiatives in our culture to go back and look at some of these things where false witness was given in a trial, and it ended up people being in prison for life or for 30 years. I can't remember the guy's name who wrote the book on that recently. And they're trying to go back on some of these things and find out. Remember the Duke lacrosse players? So here you have the opposite. You have a whole team of young men who are not African American. They're white. They're at a prestigious university. They're rich, most of them. And they were accused of raping a woman at a party. And there was a little problem there because there was no evidence that any crime had been committed. But these men seemed to fit the profile of people that we could pick on. And so the press created a firestorm. The prosecutor finally resigned and withdrew the charges. But these young men lost their education. They lost their season, which was no big deal. But they lost their reputations and subjected to trauma. Their names have been besmirched for the rest of their lives. These are just a couple of examples of what happens. There's a recent racial hoax in a high school in California where someone wrote, there were 2 water fountains side by side, and someone wrote whites only, and somebody wrote colored over the other one. And so immediately the firestorm started. What kind of racist has done this? It turns out it was a black teenage girl who did it. We've had several of those. The nooses at the NASCAR races that were, phony. The nooses in a tree that were really somebody's exercise equipment. Racial hoaxes are bearing false witness. And I'm not saying that those things have never happened, but all of this goes back to the 9th commandment. So here's what the Westminster Catechism says. Memorize these. These are catechisms. These are on the positive side. I do not join in condemning anyone without a hearing or without a just cause. I should love the truth. That's what 1 Corinthians 13 says. I should speak the truth candidly. I should openly acknowledge the truth. I should do what I can to guard and advance my neighbor's good name. Those are positive, proactive, leaning into it. That's the way we want to live. And we want to be able to say, my yes is yes and my no is no. My character's on display. What you see is what you get. And that's a freedom for us. That's a benefit to us. To not tell lies and not have to remember what we said to him and is not what we're going to say to him. And we have to keep that straight. That's complexity. Well, there's a third reason why this is in the commandments, and that's it, that a false witness was seen as being so destructive to society and to the court system that a society could not exist if it didn't have trustworthy witnesses on the stand and had no way to know whether they were trustworthy. Because it makes a society that is lawless. I want to just mention some countries where, if we could drill down, we won't this morning, but I just want to mention some countries where the law broke down, truth broke down, judges were often hunted and killed, and these countries are now in chaos because they have no working, trustworthy court system. Venezuela is one of them. Venezuela, they have systematically dismantled any way of finding out the truth or adjudicating cases in that country. Colombia has been in civil war for half a century and is one of the most politically violent places. It's beginning to calm down, but they have a lot of work to do. And again, the thing that gets attacked right away is our police and judges who are trying to seek the truth. I'm just going to mention some other. These are what I found as being the top 10 most lawless nations in the world. Somalia, Brazil, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Congo, Burundi, Iraq. These are countries where we recognize that there's a judicial system that is skewed and slanted, and often the truth is not told in those places. Well, this has implications for all of us because it's not just about our honesty during the day, which we obviously need, and this is where we're tempted. I'm not really tempted to lie about politics or other things. I can have my opinion and let it be out there. But I am tempted when the pressure's on me and when I might look bad or I might look inadequate or my work might not have been complete. I'm really anxious to say, well, the dog ate my homework, or I didn't see your text, or I didn't listen to the phone call, or I didn't read your email, or nobody told me. It's really easy to just do these little things that divert. I had a little test for myself the other day. I had committed to doing a wedding in August to a dear young man that's grown up at this church, and he's now in the Coast Guard, and I love his family, and they said, would you do this wedding? And I said, sure. Then I checked with my wife's calendar. You know how that goes. And there was a conflict that I really wanted to be with my wife, and these other couples were going to go to Montana in August. And I just thought, now can I find a way to get out of this commitment? And there are times when you have to do that, tell the truth, and you blew it, and blah, blah, blah. Fortunately, we were able to shift our other thing with Joanne and these other couples, so we can do both. But, I'm tempted to say, I didn't see what was there. I got to bail. I don't want to be that person who makes a commitment and then says, oh, something more important came up, Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we just miss it. Then we just have to tell the truth. You know what? I spoke too soon. What can I do to make it up to you? Whatever. But we all have those just a little thing that came through. I'm, tempted to say something that will protect me and it will be harmful to my neighbor. So you've got some questions in your notes there, and they'll be on the screen. I'm really eager to listen in on what you have to say about these things this morning. So talk amongst yourselves.